Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Alex Tarter. Alex is a CTO at Thalas UK Cyber Consulting and director of TurgenSec, an innovative London-based infosec startup. TurgenSec made a bit of splash in the information security space with their responsible disclosures. Some notable ones include Virgin Media, Gates Foundation charity, many law firms, and most recently, the Philippines government. Alex, thank you for coming to our interview today.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me, Boris.
All right, Alex, you have been working on some innovative infosec solutions around threat intelligence and attack surface management. Could you perhaps tell us a short story about your path in the cybersecurity space and what you have been up to these days?
Sure. Well, I got into this space well over 15 years ago. I've always enjoyed understanding computers, how they work, solving puzzles. And as with almost everybody in the cybersecurity field nowadays, kind of fell over, didn't anticipate it, but kind of fell over backwards and into cybersecurity and found I really enjoyed it. And specifically in the sort of critical infrastructure, defense, government sort of markets. And so I've been working in that area for about 15 years. And about this time last year, I was giving a talk to a group of ex-university students around cybersecurity, what it's like to work in the field, and offered to help out or be a mentor to anybody who wanted to get into the industry. And two of them ended up coming up to me afterwards and saying, actually, we have a great idea for a company. Can you help us? And so I ended up with agreement for my day job to also become a director and support to TurgenSec, which is doing some really innovative work in attack surface management and what we call digital risk protection in a way that I hadn't seen in the rest of my career. So I was really excited to join and help them out.
Very interesting. So can you tell us why has threat intelligence become more important than ever, and why should companies care about enabling a robust threat intelligence strategy?
Sure. I mean, your cyber risk is one of your biggest risks sitting on any board's agenda nowadays, generally because so much of a company's business has been automated in some way, shape or form. It relies on computers, and we've connected all those computers together. So as we saw recently with the Colonial Pipeline incident, any impact to your business systems, if that's just billing, will actually impact your entire operation. So we've seen significant impacts to these large industrial companies due to cyber incidents on their IT or in their operational or their OT sector. So the first thing that any company needs to understand is, all right, how is somebody going to attack me? And if they do attack me, how is it going to go wrong? And you need to understand the mindset of the attacker. And that's that kind of threat intelligence, understanding how people are going to come after you, how cyber incidents are going to occur, and as a senior risk owner, that allows you to make decisions about where do I deploy my resources? If I know how the attacker is going to come at me, then I should probably work out how I can best deploy my defenses to mitigate those most obvious, most highly likely risks, and also to mitigate those impacts which could have a catastrophic or business continuity issue.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to hear your personal opinion. What is the commonly held belief as it relates to threat intelligence that you strongly disagree with, based on your experience? Yeah.
Well, so there are three types of threat intelligence, and they often get sort of merged together, and people think the same thing. Now, the first is what I call strategic threat intelligence, and that's really understanding at the high level how are different nation states, threat actors coming out of you, generically, how is an industry being attacked. So that's the very high level strategic, and that won't change much beyond sort of once a quarter, every 6 months, you should get an update. And that's different to the tactical threat intelligence, which is really understanding in your specific area and potentially down to your type of company, how are they targeting you? So that's where you start to understand a little bit more personalized, right, tactical, how a threat intelligence or how an attacker is going to come after you specifically rather than you as a business in the UK, for instance. Now you're talking about a sector or your given business. And then finally, there's the operational threat intelligence. And that's all the signatures, the IP addresses, that's all those what we call indicators of compromise. And so I think the biggest misconception is if you have signed up to, if your security operations center or whatever your security team is doing, if they sign up to a threat intelligence feed and they're getting a whole load of indicators of compromise, that's only one aspect of it. That's only sort of the clues, the indicators once somebody's attacked you. So if you are blocking those, you are being very reactive should an attacker come in, but you're not being proactive. You really need this sort of tactical, strategic type of threat intelligence to, in American, they say skate to where the puck is going to be rather than skate to where the puck is. And that's essentially the same thing. You want to use that tactical and strategic level threat intelligence to position your defenses proactively rather than just relying on the indicators of compromise and operate reactively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, and how does someone listen to this for the first time, or maybe he's not he's fresh in the business and he wants to take action, or perhaps if there is somebody who is matured enough, how can a company measure or approach this concept to start doing these things?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things is readers, if you want to gather a lot of strategic and tactical threat intelligence, it's just to read. And there's so much open source intelligence out there where you can go to a lot of different cybersecurity websites, groups, analysis, and you can download or get a hold of material. If you're part of the critical national infrastructure in your given company, there's normally an information sharing collaboration. So in the UK, it's called CISP, CISP, which is run by the National Cybersecurity Center, and they share a lot of threat intelligence. But I mean, it won't be a proper cybersecurity or defensive podcast without mentioning a Sun Tzu quote, but essentially it's know thyself. You've got to really know yourself first, and then you can better before you know the attacker. So where TurgenSec is really starting to make a big difference is what we in the space we call attack surface management. So if threat intelligence is understanding how the attacker is going to come at you, attack surface management is really understanding what are you presenting to the attacker. So if an attacker wants to target your business, they're first going to take a look at you and find out where are you weak. And they're not going to start trying to go straight at you and brute force your most heavily guarded, heavily secured area. They're going to find that back door. They're going to find that part of your infrastructure that you're not paying a lot of attention to. And it's the same thing. So one of the good examples was, I said, go back to that Colonial Pipeline incident recently. There's some reporting out recently that says potentially the way that attackers got into Colonial systems was through a legacy VPN connection. So was that due to the attackers brute forcing that credentials to access the VPN? Did they discover that one of the employees who had access to the VPN tunnel reused their credentials somewhere else and breached, those credentials were breached? Don't know. So this is where, there's one element of threat intelligence to understand, oh, attackers are targeting VPNs. But the second part is to really look at you and say, do I have what attack surface do I have? Am I exposing all of my VPN connections? What do they look like? Am I monitoring them to make sure that only authorized users from expected locations are actually connecting?
Mm-hmm. So what do you think from a CISO perspective, what they should stop doing right now that they are doing? Or maybe another way around, what they should pay more priority now that they are not paying priority?
Great question. Great question. So I think CISOs today have a really tough job. Typically, any CISO of a medium to large enterprise would have anywhere from 500 to 500,000 servers facing the internet. assets facing the internet. So those could be just web, your normal company website. Obviously that needs to be exposed, but then there's the email. I talked about VPN connections. There is so much infrastructure that is facing it that you are leaving your attack surface open to the world. And what we found when we talk to CISOs and we interact with a lot of different customers, be they large or small, in general, the IT team normally has a really good handle on maybe a third to two-thirds of their exposed attack surface. So if you ask them, what assets are you exposing to the world? They'll tell you straight away that one-third to two-thirds. And that's the things that they keep looking at again and again and again. Because, they fall into a routine of protecting those because that's what they are used to. That's what's in their front of their mind. They're not always asking themselves, okay, you know what? I've looked at the same infrastructure for yesterday and the day before. Maybe I should look, what is the infrastructure I'm not looking at? And that's really where, we're looking at is looking at an attack surface and saying, right, this is the well-managed, similar infrastructure that all has similar code bases, all looks very, very the same. But here is all of the other stuff that looks unique, looks completely different. And it's probably legacy systems that you stood up and forgot about. It's shadow IT, where somebody else has put it on the system and connected it up in order to gain access and fulfill a business function, but is not actually authorized by the CISO. Or it could be what we call orphaned assets. And orphaned assets are normally where you've stood up infrastructure for, I don't know, doing a marketing campaign, and you try something out, you try out a test server, you've stood it up to fulfill a purpose. And for whatever reason, you've forgotten about it. The person who was running has left. That campaign naturally died out, but the marketing team forgot to take it down. But you end up with all of this sort of digital detritus sitting out there. So if I was going to say to any CISO, it's the carry on doing what I call good cyber hygiene. Do what you do day in and out, but sometimes stop and ask yourself, what do I not know? What am I not paying attention to? What part of my infrastructure is not feeling the love that I keep giving that same 1 to 2/3 day in, day out?
Okay, interesting. So where do you think that this all science or application like threat intelligence as a whole is heading? What are the trends in this space, and what should we expect from you guys in the future?
Well, the way that TurgenSec looks at this is definitely machine learning and human collaboration. And I use that intentionally because at the moment, one of the key trends in the industry is the use of machine learning. It's everywhere. If you're doing any type of business anywhere, you have to include machine learning in some way, shape or form. Otherwise, people go, well, what are you doing? So there's a tendency to try and use machine learning to solve every single problem. And the reason for that is because we just don't have enough human experts. We don't have enough cybersecurity experts to fulfill the demand that businesses have. So we're trying to solve the problem by throwing computers at it. And computers are really good at one or two tasks. They're really good at detecting slight variations in what seems to be very similar data. So they can find the patterns in the noise really, really well, much better than a human can. But they are not very good at understanding context. So they can find the signal, but they don't know what the signal means. And so I think there's been a real pressure in the industry at the moment to go down the path of trying to build and sell products, these sort of silver bullets, which will solve everything. Just buy this one thing, just buy this one threat intelligence feed, and it will solve your problems. Buy this one tool, and it will tell you everything you need to know. And when you run these things, what you find is it will come back and it will tell you absolutely everything it's found, which is probably the order of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of results. And so you look at this and you say, wow, okay, that's found a lot of things, but I don't know what to do. Where do I start? You just told me 1,000 things I need to do, or 10,000 things I need to do. What are the top 10? And if it tries to prioritize it, it uses some machine algorithm that tries to say, these are what I think are the top 10, but they don't have human context. So I've started to see, and this is where what really intrigued me about what TurgenSec was doing was it was using that machine learning approach to generate those signals, to find those important needles in the haystack. but then it would pass it over to human analysts to actually look at them, to evaluate them and provide some context. So what we give the customer back is, instead of a really comprehensive list that requires them to put a resource, a person on to understand it, what we do is give them a human curated list that they end up coming away going, oh God, I really understand that. That's brilliant. So that's one thing. The second thing I think is the big trend within sort of threat intelligence and attack surface management is realizing that it's not just your own infrastructure that you need to be concerned about. We live in a hyper-connected world. And so any business today typically does not have complete control over all of its data or its customers' data. It's normally shared, a lot of that, with its supply chain. Whether that's because it wants to produce, I don't know, anything from employee welfare, so they could be producing magazines for, in-house newsletters, or it could be to support business flows and sharing form processing, or it could be HR related. In some way, shape, or form, you're normally going to be sharing critical data with third parties. And once that data leaves your systems and on that third party, if the third party breaches or loses that data, it typically comes back to bite you. A great example of that was very recently with, there's a company called SITA, S-I-T-A, which runs a lot of air service provision for the air traffic management sector. And it was hosting a lot of data for airlines. So that data unfortunately got breached. And so what it found was American Airlines, I think it was, United, British Airways, a whole load of airlines ended up having to report that passengers' details, their flights, frequent flyer numbers, their seating preferences, all of that information was breached. And it started to hurt. The airlines had to be the ones who reported, but it was actually their supply chain partner, SITA, who breached the data. So despite it was SITA, it still came back to hurt the reputations of the airlines themselves. So that's where you have to realize, as a company, it's not just enough to hand over data to your supply chain and then hopefully through some procurement language, you say, you've got to take good responsibility on it. And if you don't, then I'll end up, we'll have to go to court and I'll recover costs, because at that point, your reputation's already been damaged. You've already experienced material impact, and now you're trying to recover it from a third-party company. What would be better, going back to that sort of analogy of skating to where the puck is going to be, is surely you should be looking at your supply chain partner, monitoring them, and then saying, before I hand you my data, let me see what you look like, and do you take care of the data you already have before I start handing it over to you? So you now have any CISO has a responsibility to look after the data that they have on their own infrastructure, but then the data when they pass it on to their third parties. And that's especially the case if it's GDPR related or personal private information, personally identifiable information, because that has a financial impact through fines if it turns out you breached it. Sorry, long-winded response to your question.
No, interesting, because I think this, what you said, the second part was there is a new discipline, they call it third-party risk management or vendor risk management, something like this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it started to spring up because of the impacts first-party customers are starting to see. They're realizing that third party is impacting their reputation. And there's an expectation of due diligence in your procurement side. And as I say, at the moment, typically when you procure, you might do some due diligence on the company before you sign them up to your preferred suppliers list or your procurement list. And even then, that sort of due diligence is very often, please fill out the self-assessment questionnaire. Well, okay, that might ask you, do you have a policy to address breaches? And somebody may answer yes, but that gives you very little indication for whether or not the company follows it, knows how to follow it, is it fully endorsed? Because all you've done is basically some self-assessment case of due diligence, which in today's day and age is just inadequate.
Mhm.
You need to be proactively assessing a company.
Okay. So I ask this question all my guests because I'm running the global risk community. It's kind of website for risk managers all over the world. So I'm just want to, for myself, and to know more about how can we contribute better to the process of or better understanding of this complex world of risk cybersecurity from your perspective.
Yeah. So I think this is a big topic for me, especially when it comes to cyber systems, because cyber systems are complex. We're very used to the concept in risk management, and especially in old school information assurance risk management, which is about what we call component-based risk assessment. The idea is take any system, divide it up into its individual assets, and then assess the impact due to a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And that's just the standard. Even a lot of the risk assessment frameworks do the same thing. Divide it up, identify your crown jewels, divide up all your assets, then measure the impact due to loss of CIA, and then those are your risks. What we tend to lose on that in that analysis is interdependencies and emergent properties. And any large complex system, you actually lose data if you divide it up, because you forget the fact that systems normally interoperate, they rely on each other, and there are unforeseen impacts that maybe the loss of one piece of information to the primary system isn't a big deal, but a tertiary or fourth party down the line might actually rely on that in order to perform a function, and you don't always know that. And typically these systems have been built up with such complexity that it's almost impossible to really understand. So moving forward, I think the community needs to do a better job of augmenting its existing risk assessment methodologies from just doing component-based stuff to starting to look at system-based interdependencies. Within critical infrastructure, there's a group looking at, out of the US, out of Idaho National Labs, with consequence-informed cybersecurity engineering, CCE, which is looking the same thing, trying to identify what are the feared events, trying to identify how those happen, and working out early indications of where there's areas of commonality, especially in very, very large systems, and cutting them off. And so coming back to that's the sort of where we talk about when attack management, it's not enough to just look for the vulnerabilities. You also need to look at some systemic weaknesses. You also want to look at what are the ways you've architected the system, where you've handed your data off, the interdependencies for that data. How do those larger system requirements come into play? And then you'll better understand those, as it were, business feared events, business impactful events, which you almost never see if you just divide it up and just look at the individual assets.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you, Alex, for your time, and I wish you great success with your 2 companies that you're busy with and your private life. So I hope you have some with your future plans, and I hope that our members will find this interview very, very useful.
That's great. Thank you very much, Boris.
Absolutely.